Shalom and welcome to my moment of Torah as we approach Shabbat Chol HaMoed Sukkot. I hope your holidays have been wonderful so far. On a recent walk, I was listening to the Hidden Brain podcast on NPR and chose to listen to an interview with Dr. Sheldon Solomon called "We're All Going to Die!" Feeling strongly as I do that we live in a society that thinks we can somehow cheat death, I was interested in hearing what he had to say. Dr. Solomon and his colleagues, Drs. Jeff Greenberg and Tom Pruszynski, have done extensive empirical research based on the theories of Ernest Becker, who wrote Denial of Death. They posited that being reminded of one's mortality impacts that person's behavior in various situations. In their first study, which was with judges in Tucson, Arizona, the researchers gave half of the judges a questionnaire that included something about death, and the other half the same questionnaire but without the death question. Afterwards, the judges were asked to set bail for a prostitute. For the control group, the average bail set was $50, which is about the average that it's usually set at. For the group where death was mentioned, the average bail was $455, 9 times. Other studies confirmed that when people were reminded that eventually they would die, their attitudes and behaviors were different than the control groups who were given the same questionnaires, but without the reminder of death. Based on Becker's work, Solomon and his colleagues came up with terror management theory, which proposes that a basic psychological conflict results from having a self-preservation instinct while realizing that death is inevitable and to some extent unpredictable. This conflict produces terror, and the terror is then managed by embracing cultural beliefs or symbolic systems that act to counter biological reality with more durable forms of meaning and value. Yeah, I know that's a mouthful, but you can read more about this in their book, The Worm at the Core, on the role of death in life. I bring this up now as we approach Shabbat Chol HaMoed Sukkot because the special Torah reading, which takes a break from our weekly reading, begins by speaking about Moses' frustration at being chosen by God to lead the Israelites into the Promised Land. The past few Shabbat portions have focused on Moses' impending death at the age of 120, along with the transfer of leadership to Joshua. The reason most often given for why Moses wasn't allowed to enter the land has to do with the incident where he hit the rock rather than speaking to it as God had commanded so that it would bring forth water. It made God look silly in the people's eyes and appeared to be an act of overt disobedience. However, as I've written before, the people had no water because Miriam had just died, and our Midrash connects Miriam to a well that followed the people during her lifetime. And in my mind, Moses was acting out of grief at the loss of his sister. Having heard Dr. Solomon interviewed on the podcast, Moses' behavior makes even more sense. When someone dies, we're reminded of our own mortality. But unlike a possible brush with death, which often impels people to make positive changes in their lives, terror management theory shows that the reaction is different when one is simply reminded of his or her mortality. In fact, a study of Israeli soldiers found that those who were aggressive drivers to begin with became more aggressive when faced with the idea of their death. As we age, the reality of death gets closer, and the anxiety of death, perhaps not the being dead part, but the dying part, looms larger in our minds. When this comes up, when we attend a funeral or a shiva, when we hear of a celebrity death, especially someone younger, we can be aware of our reactions and feelings and be mindful of them to choose our behavior. The gates are still closing. We pray for health and life for ourselves and those around us. May we be blessed with the presence of mind to take a moment to breathe, think, and speak before we react. Shabbat Shalom, Moadim L'Simcha.